Hey everybody, today I'm out here in my stylishly color-coordinated outfit because it's time to talk about chainsaws. I recently decided that I wanted to try and find a lightweight electric chainsaw that could basically replace this guy right here. This is a CS400 from Echo. This is a great sort of all-around use saw. I would say it has a 16-inch bar in this instance, and you can see that the bar has actually started delaminating there up front. I have a new bar, but I haven't put it on yet because, again, I've been thinking about trying to replace it. This one, all in, full of gas, full of bar oil with the 16-inch bar. This weighs about 14.5, 15 pounds. Now that is significantly lighter than my all-time favorite saw and the one that I've had the longest really, my Husqvarna 357 XP. You can see this one has a 24-inch bar on it. The bar has had a lot of really good use. It has definitely been dinged up there, but it has lasted the test of time. I can't even count how many trees this has cut down or limbed or how many chains it's gone through. It's had a new carburetor installed once, new air filters all over the place, etc. But it's been a true workhorse saw. So I was hoping to try and find something like that on the electric side. And that led me to my first electric chainsaw, which is this absolutely adorable little DeWalt chainsaw. There's a separate video on this one. I got this because I have other DeWalt tools, so I already had DeWalt 20 volt, 60 volt batteries hanging around, and it was crazy, crazy cheap online. And, you know, they say you get what you pay for, and that is true to an extent, but I have to admit that this saw really punched above its weight. Rather unfortunately, I liked this saw enough that I used it and abused it, and it's not doing so well at this point in its life. The bar is permanently wobbly due to some design flaws that go on right here under this cover. And we're definitely going to talk about those in this video because I love certain aspects of the DeWalt saw, but it's very clear up front that DeWalt is a power tools company that happens to be making a chainsaw now and then with a battery, whereas Husqvarna over here is making a electric chainsaw as a chainsaw company. And that's obvious just due to the way that these chainsaws are constructed. Now, one of the things I really like about the DeWalt chainsaws, and before I move on to that, I'll actually introduce the one that is the star of this episode right here, the one we're comparing to, which is the DCCS670. This is their latest saw, and this now is a 60 volt saw. Now, a really handy feature with the DeWalt lineup is that because these are standard DeWalt 60 volt, 20 volt batteries, I can use the same battery in this 16-inch bar electric saw as I can this itty bitty little baby saw. And that's very, very handy. So 12 inches over here, 16 inches over here, 20 volts, 60 volts, exactly the same battery. But first, let's dive into the design as I was talking about earlier. One of the things that I really like about the DeWalt saw is that we have a single screw right here to access the bar and chain, so no scrunch needed on this saw. You can see that we have one-step access to the chain tensioner, and it's a very nicely designed chain tensioner. Pretty hefty bolt right there, knob, simply turn it, clear out whatever you want to clear out in there, get the cover back on, and away you go. With electric chainsaws, the brake happens inside the saw, so there's no bulky chain brake like you'd see in a gasoline saw right here on the lid. On the downside, if I pull off the bar, you see the one flaw in this design, and that is this plastic bar right here. We do have a metal post right there at the end, but we have this plastic bar right there. And I'll show you on my 12-inch saw what happens to this over time. We have a very consistent design, so even though this has a 12-inch bar, we have the same little knob there to undo that, same tensioner. You can see these are used relatively recently, but look here, you can see that that plastic post has been deformed. You can see right there, so all that plastic missing right there, and that's why this bar is wobbly. Now, on the bright side, this plastic piece is a single piece, and it is easy to replace. You can see it's been worn down there by the chain as well over time, and it is easy to replace, and it's only $7, so you can replace that yourself. However, on this chainsaw, I've already had to replace it once, and this really isn't that old. On the other hand, if we take a look at the Husqvarna, you'll notice that we have a single scrunch nut right there. Now, it is a single nut rather than, if I move over here, the dual nut arrangement that we find on the big boy 357, of course, but the chain tensioner is actually a little bit easier to use in the 357, located right in there. If we undo the cover, you'll notice two things right away. The first thing is we have a captive bolt. That is a really handy feature. I wish every chainsaw had one of those. The other thing you'll notice is that the bar tensioning mechanism is actually part of the lid. It's not part of the saw body. I think that's a little bit of a mistake. But on the other hand, you can tell again that this is a chainsaw made by a chainsaw company. So we have a little rubber widget there to help the chainsaw refuse pop out a little bit more easily rather than spraying right on you. And then over here, we have a very important safety feature, and that is an aluminum chain catch. Aside from that, the body is pretty much what you'd expect. We have our chain brake right up there, just like you'd find in the average saw. Pretty decently sized top handle right there, wraps around to the side. We find a fan right there on the end, because this does have an air-cooled battery. You can see that we have a little air path right there. So as the chainsaw is operating, it's sucking air in here and then blowing it through the battery. Over here on the DeWalt chainsaw, we have a pretty hefty handle. I like this handle a little bit more than the Husqvarna handle, actually. We have a pretty similar mechanism right there for the chain brake, but you'll notice that we do not have a big air vent like that, and we do not have an air-cooled battery. This just sits right there in that compartment. So the battery is on its own for cooling. We also have a screen over here. You can see right there around the motor. That's exactly how the motor is cooling itself in there. That is not quite as aggressive of a cooling mechanism we find in the Husqvarna saw. On the top of the 535, we also find buttons that we don't find on the DeWalt, because the DeWalt is simply on and off. On this one, we have a power button, and then we have an eco mode button that can help run the battery out a little bit longer, gives you slightly better battery life. Now, keep in mind, of course, that this is a 14-inch chainsaw, and as you can see right here, the DeWalt is a 16-inch chainsaw. Going back to the 16-inch DeWalt here for a moment, you can see that we already have a little bit of wear here where the chain has eaten into the plastic. We don't have as many metal components right there where the chain is interacting with, and we don't have a chain catch in the same way. You can see it's just part of the lid here. So this lid has already been chewed up right there. It looks sort of like a mouse has been at it, but it's actually just the chain. So this portion of the housing right there is all that's really there to stop the chain, rather than a single aluminum metal piece. And as you can see, if I pull over a big boy chainsaw here, you can see that this really does get used. You can see that that chain catch right there mechanism has saved my leg from being skewered by a chain on many, many occasions. Chains come off, it's just the way that chainsaws are, and having a good sturdy chain catch is definitely an important feature. Even something like this Echo chainsaw has one right there. You can see it also has definitely some wear to it. So I have to say I'm a little bit surprised that the DeWalt doesn't have something quite as heavy duty. Now let's talk about sort of curb weight and balance, because that's where this whole journey started. This CS400 right here, all in, is about 15 pounds, as I said before, just a little bit over. Now that can get a little bit tiring after a day's worth of limbing. This guy right here with the BLI 200 battery, this is sort of a mid-sized battery, comes in by my scale just under 10 pounds. So this is definitely on the lighter side. You can see that it's a pretty well-balanced saw with that battery in it and the standard bar. It balances very nicely right there on the top handle. It is just about as well balanced as the CS400, definitely better balanced than my big saw right there. But for someone that's after a really light experience, Husqvarna has something interesting up their sleeve, and that's this guy right here. It's very light. This thing weighs less than half a pound, and it is a remote battery module. So we simply unplug this BLI 200 right there, and then we swap this guy right there into the side. What that does is it ties me right into this battery backpack that I have right there. This battery backpack weighs, as I recall on the spec sheet, a little over 10 pounds. It really doesn't feel terribly heavy because it's got a decent number of straps here. It's got the waist strap. Ideally, this kind of device, you would have the waist strap tightened pretty tight, so that way the weight is being sent right down to your hips. You're not carrying it on your shoulders. And more importantly, you're not carrying it on your arm anymore. Now, are you ready for the downside? The downside is the price tag, because this little contraption right here cost about the same as buying a 16-inch gasoline chainsaw and both of the DeWalt saws that I have. The battery pack was not cheap. In fact, this entire contraption cost a little bit more than I paid for my 357 XP. Admittedly, that was about 10 years ago, but that size chainsaw is still probably less expensive than this entire setup. And the charger is not included in this saw package. So you do have to buy the charger yourself. And then of course I went out and bought the BLI 200 battery, which is significantly more expensive than any of the DeWalt batteries as well. So this whole package deal is definitely going to cost you more. Now, is it worth it? Let's find out. At this point in the video, you might be thinking to yourself, he's wearing an awful lot of orange. This looks suspicious. Well, the truth of the matter is that I ended up with Husqvarna saws ages ago and have just sort of stuck with the brand because you can buy them online. And I am really lazy, and I don't like to go to a distributor or a store or a reseller and buy a steel chainsaw. So that's why I have the Swedish chainsaws rather than the German chainsaws. Now that said, I do have a few steel chainsaws and other power tools. I also have the DeWalt ones. I have some Echo chainsaws, and I have a pull-in chainsaw if you're looking for a really, really cheap disposable one. But bottom line, nobody paid for sponsored content on this channel because, quite frankly, we're too small for sponsored content. Now it's time for the battery challenge. Let's see how these saws do against one another. I have the 16-inch saw here up first with the 9 amp hour battery. Then we'll do the Husqvarna. And now we have reached the end of the battery. That wasn't as many cuts as some people thought it might. Of course, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll call that 6. And this is almost 7 full cuts of this log. But the big deal here is that you'll notice this battery is pretty warm. Now, I don't consider this a fail at all because this saw is pretty aggressive in its cutting. You can see that I was definitely cranking pretty hard on the saw there. That's because this 16-inch saw has the ability to do that. This is significantly more powerful than the DeWalt 12-inch saw. Now let's see how the smaller saw with the air-cooled battery stacks up. Remember, this is a 5.2 amp hour battery, so we don't have as much oomph in this battery. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it on, but I'm not gonna put it in the eco mode. So this is just the saw itself. We'll cut thin slices here to try and be as fair as possible. Now, one thing I noticed right away is that we don't have as much torque out of this electric motor as we see in the DeWalt 60-volt saw. Again, this is a 14-inch bar and chain, so this is a little bit closer to perhaps the DeWalt 12-inch saw in terms of overall performance. And that means that with this particular chain, it can end up stalling, so you can't really crank down as hard as you can with that DeWalt saw. But if you let the chain do the work, you just have to sort of, can't really crank down, you just have to let it just sit there on the log. It does get the job done. And we have hit the end of the Husqvarna battery just at the beginning there. So we'll count the slices here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slices. So actually one more slice than we were able to do with the DeWalt. And as you can see, even though I was trying to be as consistent as possible, this slice is just a hair bigger than this one right here. Pretty close overall, but just a tiny bit bigger. Now, again, that's not because the Husqvarna battery has more oomph in it. Again, this is a smaller battery. But if I take this battery out and feel it, you can even like hold it up to your face to see if you can feel any heat. You can definitely feel the heat radiating off the batteries, but overall the battery has been effectively cooled by the saw. All right, I've now let both batteries rest so they can theoretically be a little more cool, and we'll pop them back in and see how we go. After a little bit of a rest, the Husqvarna saw was able to cut me 10 of these discs off of this tree, and the DeWalt was able to come in with 9 discs overall after 2 separate rests. Now, remember again, this DeWalt saw has a much more aggressive motor in it. It is definitely capable of really being cranked down on that log, much more like a gasoline chainsaw. Whereas with this guy, you have to be pretty easy on the saw overall. This feels more like the DeWalt 12-inch saw that I have. Again, remember that the competitor to this saw doesn't exist yet. It's going to be the Husqvarna 540i. This is a 535i, and that's why it's not quite as torquey as this DeWalt saw right here. Now, of course, we won't know how torquey that 540i will be until I either buy one or convince someone to send me one just for a quick test. Again, this video is not sponsored by anybody, but I have been toying with the idea of buying the Husqvarna 540i because I really love this form factor saw and I really love the battery backpack. And now, of course, it's time to bottom line these two babies. They're very different saws, really. The DeWalt is much more powerful. This has a 60-volt battery. It has a bigger bar. As you could see in the cutting comparison there, I could really crank down pretty hard on the saw without stalling the chain, and you just can't do that in this Husqvarna saw. It's just not as powerful. But of course, remember, this one has a smaller bar, so its mission is different. This is a much lighter saw. This is designed to be the saw that you can very easily carry around for hours and hours and hours, and that's definitely what I've done when I've had this saw. This is the kind of saw that I can have out in the forest for 4 or 5 or 6 hours with the battery pack that I'm wearing right here on, and that really reduces the weight that's in your arm. This is a very lightweight saw. It's easy to saw things a little bit above you, definitely easy to swing around. It's really not a problem at all because of its lightweight construction. And this DeWalt chainsaw right over here is really not that much lighter with this 9 amp hour battery than the Echo CS400 saw that theoretically these guys are trying to replace. Now, admittedly, this does a better job of replacing that CS400 saw. It's much more capable. We have the bar that's about the same length as the CS400 that I have. We have a similar amount of power. You can actually fell a 10-inch tree or a 12-inch tree with this saw without too much of a problem. The DeWalt saw is significantly less expensive. This whole combo with the battery backpack and this cute little orange saw right here, this was almost $1,500. And for this price, I could have bought easily 3 of these guys here, and I could have bought 9 batteries, and it still would have been slightly less expensive than this one saw right here. Ooh, there's a tree falling in the distance. But does that mean that the DeWalt saw is better than this Husqvarna saw? I wouldn't go that far. I would say that these two saws have very different missions, and I have found myself definitely using both of them on a regular basis. The DeWalt saw is the saw that I will have next to the chipper because it's powerful enough to cut off some thicker branches with ease when you can't get them in the chipper if they're sticking out of the log, or fell small trees, things like that. But then when it comes to limbing after the tree is felled, then I pull off this guy right here, and then I'm trimming up the tree with this saw. This saw is just so much lighter, it's so much easier to deal with, and that's really what I was looking for in this process. So for me, the extra cash was worth it. I also like some of the extra mindful features on the saw. You know, again, the little teeth right over there, the fact that we do have a metal chain catch on this guy right here, and the light weighting. We also have some slightly smarter electronics in the saw that's part of what you're paying for. And I like the overall design of the oil filler. Seems like the oil lasts a little bit longer as well. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. And if you want us to review any other yard and garden tools, let me know. We will see what we can do. Again, we are buying all of these with our own budget. So nobody has sponsored any of the video content so far on the Mountain Garden channel because we just simply don't have enough viewers. But you can help with that too because you can hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully we'll be updating you on all of our random projects here on a more regular basis. That's something I have tried to promise myself. And of course, with the current pandemic lockdown, that is something that I have a lot more time to do right now as well. So I will see you all later.